Hey, welcome. I'm in studio today with Cindy, and Cindy has written an interesting new book about a lot of things. It's about civilization and nature, but one of the themes in the book has to do with conformity and some of the dangers, some of the strengths of conformity. So show us the book for a little bit and talk to us about your interest in this issue of conformity. What is it, and how did you get into that?
Absolutely. The book is called Return to the Wilds. It's a dystopian youth fantasy about a futuristic civilization and some of the pitfalls. And we'll get into a little bit of those themes later on. But one of the sub-themes actually is conformity. And, you know, I looked the word up, and it seems like a very good thing, conformity. The definition of conformity is comply with rules, standards, or laws, to behave according to socially acceptable conventions or standards. Well, you know, give that some thought. I mean, that's obeying the law, right? I mean, if you're not conforming, then you're probably out there running red lights. And, you know, if you're not behaving socially acceptable, then you're probably a troll on the internet, right?
Right, exactly,
or making Miss Manners angry because you're saying, you know, you're burping at the dinner table. But
those are good illustrations.
yeah, and
of how
so conformity is
can
a
be
good
helpful.
thing.
Yeah.
It is, and you know, if you've worked for government takes conformity so seriously that there are whole branches, you know, the Department of Conformity or a series of regulations, and of course the idea is that a federal agency is carrying out its task, it needs to stay on task.
Right. And a lot of applications in society, when I buy something, I want to make sure that
Conforms to standards.
It's the same one that I bought before, that
Absolutely.
they're telling the truth about what they made and so forth. Yeah.
So, you know, conformity can be a good thing. However, I worked in the federal government for a number of years, and government can take conformity to very ridiculous lengths. As an example, I worked at our national headquarters for a number of years, and it was a large hierarchy where you had many directors over many different areas that we managed. And what happened is I got to know many of these personalities, and they had a lot of time on their hands, so they came up with really interesting ideas and projects. And I went out to the field as a manager, and I discovered that these pet projects would often be handed down to the field manager to implement, and we would use all the force and authority of government. We had a chain of command that actually goes from the executive, from the president, all the way down through line officers down to the managers. And here you would get this directive that you were supposed to do. And I'd say, oh, the director of engineering thought that up, and he thinks we should go and inventory all of our chemicals and make sure they comply with international standards. Well, it sounds nice, but it turns out to be make work. So conformity can be kind of a ridiculous thing. And I would also say conformity can be a dangerous thing. If you're a parent, when your kids hit about 12 or 13, you may run into the dark side of conformity.
That peer pressure.
Absolutely.
They want to be accepted.
Absolutely. And I think the poster child of that is the movie Mean Girls. Where you have a perfectly nice, straight A student, likes
good
her
kid,
family.
and suddenly she's twisted into this demonic
into this demonic thing to be part of the plastics. So that's some of the problem with conformity.
But it's not just teenagers, probably, is it? I
mean, that's
it
absolutely
affects
true.
Adults too,
There's huge pressures to conform, as you know, to go along with the boss at work, you know, to not speak up, to keep your head down. But sometimes when you have personal principles, that gets you, that can be a difficult thing. I just was talking to my brother-in-law, and he had been on a jury trial. And I won't go into the details of that, but there was tremendous pressure from the other jurors to conform to a certain opinion. That was wrong. It was unethical. And I mean, it caused the guy nightmares. It was just terrible.
Crazy stuff.
So.
Okay. Now, you and I talked earlier about an example from literature, right?
Yes,
There's a character in C.S. Lewis.
Yes, one of the scariest stories I ever read about conformity was actually the famous writer C.S. Lewis wrote some science fiction. He wrote something called the Space Trilogy. And his last book, it's called That Hideous Strength. It happens back on Earth, and it actually happens in a small college town. But one of the key characters, a fellow named Mark, is a young, probably assistant professor, young faculty, and really wants to be accepted.
Trying to make his way in the career,
And to his great delight, he gets invited into the inner circle of the faculty, and they're the progressive people. They're not the fuddy-duddies that want to be traditional, and he is so proud of himself. But as the book rolls on, it turns out that this faculty group has been co-opted by this very, very evil intelligence that's trying to destroy the town and destroy the world. And he's sucked into something way over his head.
Yeah.
A great story on conformity.
It's a great story where eventually the choices have to be made, and you get in too deep to be able to extricate yourself.
Absolutely.
And so, like you said, principles come into play because there might be a cost if we really want to
stand up for
what is right and for what we know goes against the grain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, does that tell us a little bit how that is reflected in the story?
Yeah, how that plays out in my book. Yeah, I would love to. What I envision in Return to the Wilds is that we have a system of government, sort of a system of city-states by this time, and people have sort of agreed to be at peace as long as we can use our technology and develop economically. And there's an overall government system called the Dominion, and the Dominion's job is to protect people's individual civil rights and look after security. Those are all good things.
Yeah.
And the main employees of the Dominion, they're called the yesers.
That says something right there, right?
Yes, that's pretty interesting, right? Well, the yesers, as the story unwinds, it seems like that they're really much more interested in their career and making sure the higher up is pleased and keep filing the right paperwork. And as a government employee, I've been in some of these places. And by contrast, we have a group of smart students that find themselves charged to protect the wild places. And they're encouraged by their teacher, who's a little bit of a renegade. He actually had been one of these government employees, and he decided that it was more important to protect the wild places. So he's out here being a teacher, and he really encourages them. You find the kids using a lot of unique gifts and skills and being very creative in sort of standing up to this force that's supposed to take care of everything, but is actually being a threat to nature.
Yeah, interesting. Fascinating juxtaposition there between the two. So we hope you enjoy that book. We look for it on the page below. You'll see a link to it. But we encourage you to take these ideas about conformity and talk to somebody about them. Talk to someone, a mentor in your family or a friend, so you can really process the worth of these ideas for you. Thanks for watching today.